I had no idea what was going on at the time and spent a lot of time doubting my husband. This was almost 10 years ago. I was in my 30s and had only recently married my husband. With my husband working so hard even before we married, I expected life with him to be difficult. But he never came home for so long that I felt alone. At first, I tried to let my husband relax at home during the rare times he will be at home. But my frustration grew. I became harsh with him every time I saw his face. My husband would try to soothe me, but if he saw that I was still unsatisfied, he started to ignore me. I wanted him to look at me, no matter how busy he was with his work, because we were married. This emotion got the best of me, and I couldn't look at my husband objectively any longer. Whenever I would pick a fight with my husband, he would always say, "I'm going to settle down soon, and then we'll go to that island you like." But this never came true. "Work is more important than me, isn't it?" I said. "If so, don't force yourself to come home. I'm tired too, and seeing you so exhausted makes me sad." No matter how many horrible things I said to him, he never took it seriously, and I began to have a nagging feeling that our marriage was coming to an end. Soon after, my husband could tell I wasn't even mad at him and had no feelings for him. I didn't suspect it at first because he worked in a department with many business trips. But one day, I found a receipt and membership card for a hotel near our house in his suit pocket after he came home from a business trip. The receipt indicated that he had stayed at the hotel on a day when he was out of town on a business trip, and he had accumulated points for more than one night. As a successful businessman who could get the job done, my husband was quite popular with the ladies at work. I guessed that he had found another woman to be with. Why should I have a hard time when he is enjoying being with another woman? I went out at night in spite of my husband's infidelity and made plans on the weekends too. It was fun for a while, but eventually I grew tired. I was tired of forcing myself to smile and not being able to truly enjoy myself. Perhaps it was finally time for my husband and I to be free. We're both avoiding each other, not facing each other as husband and wife. It would be preferable if my husband was happier with someone other than me. I suppose it's time for me to move on to the next chapter of my life. But this is the husband I used to love until I realized I didn't want to spend the rest of my life with him. It took a lot of guts for me to ask for a divorce. I also wondered if there was really no other option but to call it quits. But it seems that my husband has a new girlfriend. After days of deliberation, I made a decision and sent a text message to my husband's cell phone. "Will you come home early today? I need to talk to you." I texted him on his cell phone. "I need to talk to you too, and I'll try to leave as soon as possible." He replied right away. I found myself thinking that my husband must not want a divorce, even though I was certain I had made my decision. My husband is also seeking a divorce. Just thinking about it made my heart race so fast that I couldn't breathe and I struggled to stand. My husband's heart was not with me, it went to someone else. Let's not cry anymore. At the very least, I should end things with a smile. I made my decision and waited for my husband to return home. It was shortly after 9 p.m. when my husband returned home. He'd lost an unexpected amount of weight. His kind eyes and tone of voice remained the same, but there was a gap between us that seemed insurmountable. My husband, who had never been a man of many words, kept looking down and remained silent except for a few words while I spoke. I wanted to end the conversation with my husband in a respectful manner because I felt he was making a lot of fun of me. We were a married couple, albeit for a short time, and we were about to divorce. So why wouldn't he tell me how he felt? I became increasingly angry and began to argue with him. However, my husband remained silent and listened to what I had to say. I wanted him to say something, so I told him that I knew about his new girlfriend. He probably thought I was oblivious to the fact. If he knew I knew everything, he would become impatient and make one excuse after another. Hearing my words, my husband looked at me in surprise, then smiled briefly. After a brief pause, he asked, "What, you knew?" I said. Strangely, I couldn't help but laugh at his joking tone, which made my husband laugh. And for the first time in a long time, we laughed together. Regardless of the topic of the conversation, I was overjoyed to be able to laugh with my husband like we used to. We were able to talk again after that, which was a strange sensation. Perhaps it was because he found out I knew about the affair. My husband's face appeared to be revitalized. "Let's stop attacking each other. I don't want to leave you because I don't like you," he said. My husband agreed to my proposal, and we decided to clean our room and share our belongings so that we could leave at any time. They were all precious memories, but they were all things I wanted to keep hidden for a while. My husband has always been the type of person who uses things he's had for years, but today he hadn't hesitated to throw them away. His grace overwhelmed me even more. "Take anything you want, it's all my fault, so this is my atonement," he said when the room was clean and tidy and we only had each other's belongings. My husband's eyes seemed to well up with tears as he said this. Did he feel sad as he cleaned up the mess? That was very clear to me because I felt the same way. You still have time to think about it, don't you? Let's clean up one step at a time. I decided to take a break for the rest of the day after cleaning up the entire mess. I took a bath to clear my mind. I should be able to get compensation from my unfaithful husband, but it was clear that our relationship had already ended. Besides, I don't want to taint my memories of my husband any further. As I was getting ready for bed after the bath, my husband entered the bedroom. He climbed into bed and gently drew me into his arms. "Hey, this is weird, and I feel bad for your girlfriend," I said. My husband said quietly, "Just one more time, I want to be by your side." I stiffened slightly. He was trembling as he wrapped his arms around me. "Are you crying?" I asked him, but he didn't respond. I noticed that his body was lighter and more bony as I stroked his back. "Are you sure you're well? You appear to have shed some pounds." When I said this to him, his body stopped shaking. "I've been cutting weight," he said, pulling his body away from mine, taking a deep breath. "Okay, is there anything else I should know? Are you sure you're okay?" It had been a long time since I had touched my husband's body, and I was surprised to see how different it looked from before. My husband's physique was always stocky and muscular. Even when he was busy, he enjoyed working out, but he told me, "She likes me like this." I was sad once more. He's doing it for her. Why doesn't he just forget about me if he enjoys being with her so much that he loses weight? I see. Then there's no need to cry because it's the last day, or is it tears of joy? To keep my sadness at bay, I said something sarcastic that I didn't need to say. "You're still the same. I like that part of you too. I wish you a happy life from tomorrow. I'll be praying for you wherever you are," my husband said lightly. After saying that, my husband began to snore. He was a man who moved at his own pace until the end. I hope so as well. I fell asleep after murmuring to his sleeping face. I overslept the next day because I had stayed up late cleaning up the room the day before. My husband was no longer in bed when I awoke. When I entered the living room, I noticed an A4-size envelope on the table, and when I opened it, I discovered a bank book and a slew of documents inside. When I removed everything, I discovered that it was related to our marital property. There was also an unusually large sum of money in the bank book in my name. And I discovered the divorce papers in a small envelope. My husband's section had already been filled, so all that remained was for me to complete and submit mine. In a panic, I dialed my husband's cell phone, but it was disconnected because it appeared to have been canceled. I spent several days asking about my husband's whereabouts with his parents and friends, but none of them would tell me. I had no choice but to contact his company, where I discovered that my husband, the workaholic, had resigned a few months before. It would have made sense if he made a new girlfriend and left, but why go to such length? Why didn't anyone tell me anything? I've grown suspicious of people, and there appears to be no way to contact my husband. The mental fatigue that had been building up since before the divorce nearly crushed me. My husband had gone to the trouble of arranging compensation for me, and now that I was free, I decided to spend some time in a place I really enjoyed. We arrived at the remote island, which took nearly a day to reach from the mainland. The island was depopulated and about 3,000 people lived there. I had visited the island once with my husband and was captivated by its natural beauty and the slow flow of time. My husband promised that we would return to the island once his work was completed. I miss my husband, but maybe what I need now is the peace and quiet of that place. I quit my job and moved to this remote island a few months later after renting the house to someone else. It was a risky move on my part, but I knew I couldn't stay in my house any longer. I'm not sure how my husband paid off the mortgage, but I know he worked very hard. But there were too many memories to keep living alone in the house. However, I didn't want to waste my husband's efforts, so I didn't want to just let it go. There are many strange things, but I can't ask my husband about them anymore. I plan to spend time on his quiet island, relaxing and letting myself go. I began to adjust to island life and became acquainted with my neighbors. I had enough assets to live a normal life without working, but I realized that doing nothing was even more depressing. So I started working as a sort of helper, assisting the elderly neighbors with their problems. I was initially treated as an outsider, but as I became more used to the work, I was relieved to be accepted as one of the islanders. As I was settling in, I learned from a coworker that a new client had arrived from the main island for medical treatment. He had become ill and had chosen this island as his final residence because there was no treatment available. Moving to this island with no medical facilities would be difficult, unless you're very prepared to move to this island in that condition. I was thinking that being in charge would be difficult when the new client asked for a visit, and I was the only one free. I had heard about his medical condition, so I was nervous as I went to his house. We arrived at a small house on a hill with a view of the ocean. The house had been vacant for a long time and had been renovated to the point where it was livable, but it was really just enough to keep the wind and rain out. I questioned whether this was the best place for him to spend his final days. With concern, I rang the doorbell. "Come in," a small voice said, barely audible. I gave my usual greeting and entered. I found my client sitting in front of a window, the sun and wind streaming in. I couldn't see his face because it was backlit, so I squinted as I approached. "It's a pleasure to meet you today, sir." As I looked at the face that had turned to me, I was speechless. My ex-husband sat there. We were both taken aback. We just stood there staring. My husband initiated the conversation. "You found me out," he said. He was mischievously smiling, like before. "What exactly are you doing here?" I was so confused by my husband's presence, the fact that he wasn't supposed to be there, as well as the information I had heard at work, that I couldn't speak properly. My husband grabbed my hand and forced me to sit next to him. He sat next to me and held my hand until I relaxed. I couldn't think of anything to say to him, and as I sat there, I heard a voice at the door. I wiped my tears and opened the door, where an elderly man stood. He seemed surprised to see my tear-stained face, but he bowed, went inside, and sat down next to my husband. "How are you doing today?" he inquired. He spoke in a soft voice. My husband said that there was nothing unusual and began chatting with him. The elderly man was most likely the island's only doctor. I remembered my colleagues telling me that there were no inpatient facilities on the island and that the clinic nurse and doctor were the island's lifelines. So it appears that my husband came to the island to spend his final days here. Although it was his decision, I listened intently to their conversation. I was wondering if there was anything I could do to help. My husband's doctor left after about 10 minutes of casual conversation. I couldn't help myself and ran after him. I guess my flustered appearance startled him again, but when I told him of our relationship, he seemed to understand. I questioned the doctor about my husband's condition and future treatment, but he said, "I can't tell you without his consent." Maybe he felt sorry for me and said, "He won't be able to walk by himself very soon. It seemed a shame for him to spend his final days alone, so please be there for him." I was stunned. What became of my husband's girlfriend? I returned back to the house with heavy steps, where my husband was waiting. My husband appeared to have anticipated my questioning the doctor and greeted me with a smile. "You're back." I couldn't leave without my husband, so I asked him to let me spend the night. My husband's house was only a few pieces of luggage and a couple of futons. It was the first time I'd slept with my husband since we discussed divorce. As I cuddled up under the covers with my husband, we told each other how we got here. I was eager to ask about his illness, but I decided that it wasn't time to talk about painful topics, so we reminisced. This was also due to my feelings about his relationship with her. I asked him if he hadn't brought her to the island before I asked to stay, but he just laughed and covered it up. The fact that he didn't say anything suggested that there was a sad event. I was careful not to hurt his feelings by asking any more questions. The next day, I informed my employer of what had occurred and decided to take some time off. I want to spend what time my husband had with him. I took my husband, who couldn't walk very far, around the island in a wheelchair. There were places I remembered from my previous visit, places and scenery I wanted to show him for the first time. It was satisfying just being together. I wish we'd been this close when we were married. Even after my divorce, I discovered that the feelings I had grew stronger. But there's nothing I could do about it now. My husband would be confused if I told him. Like friends, I would stay by his side. The good times were fleeting, but the disease was gradually taking its toll on my husband. His physical strength had deteriorated to the point where he could no longer go out or even take the long-awaited walks. Even daily tasks became difficult, and he began to doze off and fall asleep more frequently. The doctor came to see him every day, but the only relief was that he was no longer in pain, and I couldn't believe that this was natural and that he would leave me so soon. I nursed my husband, never leaving his side for a second, so he wouldn't be alone when he awoke, which could happen at any time. Sometimes he'd wake up and tell me the rest of the dream he just awoke from, and other times he'd tell me about long-ago memories as if they just happened. I loved every moment, and this love exacerbated my sadness. My husband gradually stopped waking up after that. When we stopped talking, I stayed by his side, reading his favorite books and telling him about the sights and sounds I'd missed so he could understand. I wanted to tell him about a beautiful sunset one day, so I held his hand and tried to speak to him. My husband's hand was cold to the touch. He was barely breathing, and his chest moved in an unnatural way. I panicked and called the doctor, who said he would be there right away. I waited for him, feeling as if my heart was being ripped out of my chest by the out-of-control situation. I hoped it was a misunderstanding. I wanted him to reassure me that everything would be fine. However, when the doctor arrived, he took a look and said, "His blood pressure has already dropped quite a bit. Let him go in peace. I believe he wants you to stay with him, so I'll sit this one out. Don't worry, I'll be right there if anything happens, so please stay by his side." The doctor then said goodbye to my husband and walked out. So the time has come. I knew it would come, but it was unbearable. I was delighted to have met you. There were some challenges, but the truth is that I adore you. I held my husband's hand and whispered in his ear. Then my husband gently squeezed my hand back. It was medically impossible, but I clearly felt it. Soon after, he took his last breath and died quietly. I couldn't stop crying, but I was glad to have been there for him at the end. I was so busy after he had died that I didn't have time to mourn until after the burial. When I finally got home after cleaning up my husband's belongings, I noticed that mail had accumulated like a mountain. I was struck by the nostalgic handwriting I discovered as I went through them one by one. My husband had written dozens of letters. I wondered how long it had been since I had spent every day with him, trying to keep as close to him as possible. His letters started on the day of our reunion. My husband had moved here in the hope of seeing me again, but he didn't expect to actually find me here. It was difficult for him not to notice how surprised and delighted he was, it read. I couldn't stop laughing at how funny my husband's letters were. And the fact that my husband felt that way was the best compliment he could have given me. The date on the letter indicated that he had been posting it every day, but his handwriting became more dirty and the length of the letter became shorter as the days passed, clearly demonstrating the progression of his illness. With sadness, I continued reading, but my eyes stopped at one point. He had written the truth about our divorce. My husband's illness started during our marriage. When he discovered it, there was nothing they could do to help him, and the treatment he received as his last hope was ineffective and only had side effects. My husband made plans to divorce me because he didn't want me to spend the rest of my life with this disease, and I fell right into his trap. He had no idea I'd suspect the existence of another woman, but he didn't deny it because he thought he could give a lot of money to me as compensation. Because I no longer required medical treatment, I wanted to liquidate all of my assets so that you could live freely, he wrote. What hurtful words I'd hurled at my husband, who had thought that far from me. I sincerely apologized. Tears flowed uncontrollably. Then there was a knock on the front door. I wiped my tears quickly and opened the door to find my doctor standing there. What brings you here, doctor? I inquired. When I asked, he handed me a sealed envelope. The envelope was identical to the one I had just read from my husband. He asked me to post it every day. He wrote a few days' worth of letters before he fell into a coma, and he entrusted them to me. I couldn't refuse, and this is the last letter. He asked me to give it to you when you return to your home. So that's what this was about. This was my husband's final letter. I thanked the doctor and read my husband's letter alone. When I opened it quietly and calmly, I found a thin but clear note that said, "Thank you, I love you." We had come so far, but our hearts remained connected. I love you too. When I said this, I thought that I saw my husband's portrait's mouth smile a little. I am still living on this island, decades after my husband died. I am now officially recognized as an island resident. I built a grave next to where my husband's house used to stand, the day I was sure I'd never leave the island. My husband used to look out the window every day, and I'm sure he still does. I intend to join him there one day, and I am at peace and very happy to be surrounded by memories of my husband. Thank you for sticking with me until the end. I'll see you in the next video.
You and your mother get the 70-square-foot storage room. My husband, who got stuck between a rock and a hard place living in my parents' home, had an outburst right after we finished renovating. My husband snapped. He started saying he would kick me and my mother out and live with his own mother in my parents' house, which was remodeled to look exactly like our new house. I was shaking with anger as I realized my parents' house, filled with memories of my late father, had been taken over. My name is Lisa Matthews, and I turned 33 this year. I've been married to my husband, Thomas, for 8 years. We both work and live with my mother at my parents' house. It's okay because our jobs are very close by. It was a sort of curveball situation, you know. My father passed away before I got married. I was hesitant to leave my mother alone to get married, but my husband said, "If you're worried about leaving your mom alone, let's live together." I was really happy when he agreed to live in the home my father built for us. Although it is an old home, it's a home filled with memories for my mother and I. My husband is the youngest of 3 brothers, and my mother-in-law seemed to have spoiled her eldest son a lot. My husband often complained about the vast difference in treatment between him and his eldest brother. Because of his lightweight position as the youngest child, he was able to make the decision to live at my parents' house. I made up my mind to marry him after hearing these words. However, there was one person who was against my husband living in my family home. It was my husband's mother, my mother-in-law. Perhaps she felt as if her own son had been stolen. The eldest son and his wife live in my husband's family home, so it would be difficult for us to live there, even if we wanted to. As we were saving for our own home, I convinced my mother-in-law that it would be best for us to start our married life at my parents' house without paying rent. Although I had heard that my mother-in-law had always favored her eldest son, she suddenly started to show concern for my husband around this time. I didn't think we'd have this much trouble over my husband moving out of his family home, but our relationship with my mother-in-law remained strained after our marriage because of this issue. Lately, my husband has become very concerned about his mother. It might be because she suddenly started to treat him with affection after our engagement was decided. Maybe he's happy to get attention from his mother, but my husband has started to prioritize her over everything. Above all, he also starts to get furious if I don't think of my mother-in-law first. I've never neglected my mother-in-law, and I've been trying to be nice to her. However, according to my husband, I am treating my own biological mother better than my mother-in-law. Of course, we don't talk about such things in front of my mother. When we were alone together, it had become a habit for him to whine and complain. Because my husband keeps telling me to pay more attention to my mother-in-law, I try to visit her house frequently, even though I always bring her favorite gifts and make sure to let her know before I go. She is often not at home. I could feel that she was obviously avoiding me, but I had no choice but to go because I knew that if I didn't, my mother-in-law would complain to my husband that I never visit or bring her anything. Every time my sister-in-law, the wife of the oldest brother, apologizes and hands over the gifts to my mother-in-law. She also seemed to be receiving a lot of criticism from our mother-in-law, and she said, "It's tough on both of us. We're the same age and we get along really well." I thought that my mother-in-law's attitude would soften as the years went by, even though things had been strained at first as newlyweds. But I was very wrong. Even after 8 years of marriage, her attitude has not changed at all. A lot has changed over the 8 years since we got married. My father-in-law passed away, and twins were born to the eldest son and his wife. There have been various changes in our family. The house of my in-laws is particularly lively now. The eldest son and his wife have many children, and with the recent birth of the twins, they now have 5 children. Moreover, all of them were boys. Because of the excessive liveliness, my mother-in-law seemed overwhelmed, and my husband asked me if we could take care of my mother-in-law in our house for a little while. Actually, my brother-in-law told my husband that his wife was having a hard time, and he wanted their mother to do some housework. But my brother-in-law's wife told me that our mother-in-law didn't want to do any of it, and could she stay at our house instead? Although we had an extra room, the house was terribly old. I proposed to my husband that if my mother-in-law was going to live with us temporarily, we might need to renovate the house. My husband seemed to think I would object to keeping my mother-in-law, and he looked surprised at my reaction. I wasn't really keen on the idea myself, but I agreed in hopes that my brother-in-law's wife would have a break. My husband works for a construction company, and renovations are his expertise. It can be sure that my husband will take care of everything. I'll leave it to you because you're the expert. I said so and decided to renovate this house. My mother is getting old, so it was a good opportunity to consider making the house accessible by removing the steps and installing the handrails. During the renovation, my mother and I stayed at my sister's house, and my husband stayed temporarily in a weekly rental apartment with my mother-in-law. But the incident happened on the day when the renovation was completed. Up to this point, I had believed that the house was being transformed into a comfortable home. I was looking around the house under my husband's guidance. There are no steps and handrails in various places, making it possible to live in the house for a long time, even when one gets old. My husband had cleverly made a hobby room for himself. I decided to accept it. Since he is a contributor to the renovation, let's at least give him credit for that. After being shown all the rooms, I suddenly realized there were no rooms for my mother and I. The room my mother used to use was now my mother-in-law's room. Where's Mom's room? You haven't shown it to me yet. I didn't care about my own room, but it was strange that there was no room for my mother. I just showed you, my husband said, laughing. I had a bad feeling about this. Huh? You haven't shown me yet. You and your mom get the 70 square foot storage room, my husband replied. I couldn't believe my ears. Indeed, I was shown the 70 square foot storage room earlier. It was the place in the house that received the least sunlight. A dark storage room with only a small window. Are you joking? Don't say stupid things, I retorted. My mother-in-law intervened between my husband and I. It's been 8 years since you became my daughter-in-law, but you still haven't learned how to behave as a wife. You're not qualified to be a wife if you're going to bite back at your husband. This house was beautifully rebuilt by Thomas. If you don't like that room, why don't you get a divorce and leave? She spat out. The word divorce suddenly flashed in front of me, and I lost my patience, my blood rushing to my head. Thinking that I wouldn't dare to divorce, my husband was laughing. At that moment, all the affection built up over 8 years of marriage flew away. I see. This was your plan from the beginning. If you don't like the 70 square foot storage room, why don't you put your mom in a facility? There's no room anyway. It must be hard for you to have 2 mothers under the same roof. I glared at my husband, who dared to say such a thing. Come to think of it, my brother-in-law's wife told me. Since the renovation was decided, my husband and mother-in-law were always stuck together and talking about something. My husband, having never indulged before, was now behaving like a child towards his mother, doting on her in front of my brother-in-law and his children. Ever since the renovation was decided, my mother-in-law was thrilled to have a new house and a quiet environment, and my husband was eagerly waiting to live with his beloved mother. Seeing the 2 of them attached at the hip and grinning, I started to feel sick. I took my stunned mother's arm and, making loud footsteps, walked out the front door. I deliberately stomped on the hallway as I walked, thinking at least it might do some damage. My mother followed me, bewildered, as we left our family home. The triumphant laughter of my husband and mother-in-law echoed from behind us. I couldn't forgive my husband's betrayal after living together as a couple for 8 years. All I could think about was getting revenge. When we finally returned to my sister's house, we were so overwhelmed we just collapsed. It was all too much to even put into words. My mother was still in shock. "Do you think they've taken over our house?" she muttered after taking a sip of the tea my sister had made. Her words were like a punch in the gut. This was the result of me agreeing to the renovation my husband suggested and leaving everything to him. "We have to reclaim our house, our home, filled with so many memories. The house that Dad built for us," she whispered. I squeezed her hand tightly. Half measures were not enough for me. "We can't just sit back and do nothing. We're going to fight this head on." My mother looked up at me. "What are we going to do?" "I have a plan." I revealed my plan to my mother. She looked a bit surprised, but nodded in agreement. "If it's your idea, Lisa, I won't oppose it." With that one sentence from my mother, our counterattack against my husband and mother-in-law began. A few days later, I saw a moving truck parked near our family home. From afar, I could see my mother-in-law directing my husband to bring in her belongings. Judging from the amount of luggage, it was clear that she intended to move in for good, not just temporarily. My mother-in-law didn't lift a finger, just gave instructions to my husband. He happily helped her with the move. Seeing his face made my anger towards them grow even more. After checking the situation at my family home, I visited our lawyer with a real estate agent. I thought it was the only way to counter my husband's betrayal. I explained to the lawyer everything that had happened after the renovation and how my husband and mother-in-law had taken over our house. At first, he was shocked, but after hearing about my husband's terrible behavior, he shared our anger. And so we were able to secure the full cooperation of both the lawyer and the real estate agent. A week after my husband and mother-in-law had taken over my family home, I visited again. When I rang the doorbell, my cheerful mother-in-law appeared. "Hello, who's there?" "Oh, it's you." Her face soured as soon as she saw me. "I have something important to discuss today. I'm coming in." "Oh, I'm sorry. You're acting as if you were the owner of this house. It's easy to forget that it's actually my house," I said sarcastically and walked straight into the house. The house, having been renovated and filled with new furniture and appliances, was no longer the family home I remembered. It felt as if my childhood memories had been completely wiped away. My husband was relaxing in the living room at the back. Like my mother-in-law, he looked displeased at the sight of me and said, "What's up with you barging into people's houses like that?" "You. Long time no see. I have something important to discuss today." I had my lawyer present as well, and I faced my husband across the table. "What's up? You decided to live in a tiny studio apartment? Got a mover for just one guy? Not much stuff you can fit in a studio apartment, huh?" He mocked. I was pissed off at my husband's attitude, but I had decided to remain calm today. No matter what, I was bound to win this. There was no need to rush anything. Before jumping to conclusions, there's something I want to ask you. Why had he renovated my family home into such a state and driven us out? I wanted to confirm his true intentions. I thought we had been living as a happily married couple with no major disputes since our marriage. I was sure his relationship with my mother was also good. I don't understand why my husband's attitude changed so drastically. Even if he was instigated by my mother-in-law, what he did was too bold. At my question, my husband let out a big sigh as if it were troublesome. Then he showed a sneering smile again. "I got tired of it all. Living like a dutiful husband, being considerate to you and your mother. I've been patient for a long time. I want to live with my mother. I don't need anything else. I was taken aback at my husband, who half shouted. I was speechless at the realization that he was just a mama's boy. Unable to say anything, I listened to my husband start to spill all the frustrations he had been holding back. He was frustrated that he couldn't live with his mother and embarrassed that as a man he was living in his wife's house. It felt like I had been deceived. He endured it all on his own, got angry on his own, and even plotted to take over my family home. I began to suspect he might be a psychopath. If you have that much dissatisfaction, you should have just told me. How can I possibly express dissatisfaction? I'm a man. You should understand. Even his final assertion was utterly ridiculous. My mother-in-law was teary-eyed as she listened to my husband's argument. I thought that this was the result of her nurturing her eldest son with excessive affection, but it didn't seem like she thought so. She just seemed to pity her son, who adored her. Being subjected to this cheap soap opera, I sighed heavily, unable to bear the ridiculousness. It seemed that my husband was offended by my attitude and raised his voice. What's with that attitude? You should be grateful that I even prepared a small studio room for you. I could have taken away your room too. With his face turned red, my husband looked like a tantrum-throwing child. That's right. Keep a room for a useless daughter-in-law. What a kind son you are. I'm happy to be praised by you. To quickly end this farce, I presented my husband with the divorce papers. Of course, already signed by me. Please divorce me. I don't want to stay married after being treated like this. Then I showed him the registration of the house, explaining that it was one of the properties I had inherited from my father and it was under my name. Looking at the documents, my husband seemed to realize something. I won't divorce. I did the renovation. Even if the property is under your name, it should be considered as both of ours. I will absolutely not divorce. It seemed my husband realized that if we divorced, he would be kicked out of this house. Even if you don't want to divorce, what made you think you could stay here? The house is in my name. It's my property, so I've sold it. I spread out another document before my husband, a sales contract for the land and house. Both he and my mother-in-law leaned in to check the names and dates on the paper. Since this house is already sold, you'll need to move out promptly. We have potential buyers, so you should leave by today or tomorrow. With a smile, I told the two of them. Their faces turned pale. Whether you divorce or not, you cannot live in this house. I don't want to see your faces anymore, so I want you to divorce. Hold on. Why? Wasn't this your house? My mother-in-law had mistakenly thought that the house belonged to my husband. He probably hadn't expected me to take such drastic measures. He seemed to have assumed that I would accept some kind of compromise and forgive him. But I'm not that naive, and my love for my husband has cooled. I don't have a shred of mercy left. Please discuss the details with my lawyer. Don't come directly to me. If we are kicked out of this house, where will we? Yeah, we thought we finally found a place where we could peacefully spend our retirement, and a maid. My mother-in-law seemed to have thought of my mother and me as maids rather than family. Feeling it wasn't good for my mental health to talk to these people anymore, I suggested, why don't you go back to your family home and live with your eldest son and his wife? Oh, but since you made such a fuss about leaving, your older brother might be angry and not let you in. Leaving those words behind, I quickly left my family home. My family home filled with so many memories. I hesitated to sell it. But after being so disrespected, I couldn't back down. The truth is, my childhood home had already drastically changed. I don't think my decision was wrong. 3 days later, my husband and mother-in-law hastily left my family home. I didn't want to keep the house after it had been remodeled so recklessly, so I had it demolished and put the land up for sale. Looking at the empty plot where nothing was left, I felt a mix of emptiness, relief, and a complicated array of other emotions. After that, my husband and mother-in-law moved back to their family home for a while, seemingly treated as nuisances by my older brother and his wife. My husband, who had been reluctant to divorce until the end, seemed to have realized my feelings had completely cooled when I left all negotiations to my lawyer. My lawyer said he signed the divorce papers while crying at the end. Eventually, my husband seemed to be despairing of his mother, who had started to flatter my older brother more than him. Just when he thought he had finally become his mother's number one, it turned out to be a short-lived victory. It seems that my mother-in-law was ultimately disowned by my older brother and his wife. My husband and mother-in-law started living together in a small apartment near their workplace. My husband, who had never really lived alone, seemed to be struggling, and my mother-in-law, despite complaining about her son's low earnings, had to do all the housework again, complaining every day. My husband contacts me almost every week, asking for reconciliation because living with my mother-in-law is too hard, but I ignore all his messages. Even after everything that happened, my husband, who still thinks we can reconcile, is really a fool. I have no intention of remarrying, and I've built a small new house on the small plot of land left by my father, where I live with my mother. It's a small, single-story house because it's just the two of us, but it's filled with things that my mother and I love. I'm still working, so I have no financial worries. My mother, who was shocked by the loss of our old home, is gradually regaining her energy. Even though we're now strangers, my sister-in-law from my older brother's family brings her children over to play at our new house. She treats us the same after the divorce, and I'm truly grateful. Our new life with my mother has just begun. My mother and I laughed, promising to enjoy whatever comes next.
Seriously, you're such a fool. How can anyone be as inept as you? Fool, inept. How many times had such cruel words been hurled at me? I had vowed my eternal love to him, truly believing that we could find happiness together. That was the idea, at least, when we got married. But when I came to my senses, the so-called love had vanished somewhere. My husband's domineering attitude escalated day by day, to the point where even the care of my mother-in-law was forced upon me. Physically and emotionally, I was on the brink. If things kept going this way, I would lose my sanity. However, God did not abandon me. The person who reached out to me, teetering on the edge of despair, was none other than my mother-in-law, whom I was taking care of. My name is Mary Wagner, 30 years old. After graduating from university, I worked in a publishing company. I quit my job at the time of marriage, and now I'm a full-time housewife. My friends say they envy me. How lucky you are to be a housewife. Your husband must be earning well, they say. But my married life isn't all that happy. In fact, it might be closer to hell. The cause of this was my husband, Jack. We met through work and got married after 2 years of dating. Jack, 3 years older than me, had a slightly cool side to him, and we weren't exactly the lovey-dovey couple. Still, I loved him for his solid self-identity and mature composure. I thought we could live a peaceful, happy life together. That was my expectation. But the moment we became a married couple, his attitude completely changed. Jack, to put it plainly, was a patriarch. I realized this a few days after our marriage. I, who had listened to his desire for me to become a full-time housewife, began to devote myself to household chores from the day after our marriage. That day, too, I had made dinner in time for Jack's return and was waiting for him. Jack comes home a little past 7 p.m. He then, looking at the dinner on the table, suddenly raised his voice. "Hey, what's this meal?" "Huh? It's a gratin and salad, plus a pottage soup." "Don't mess with me. If you're going to prepare a meal for your tired husband, it should be a full-course meal." I'm sorry. The last time you said it was delicious, so..." "That's not an excuse. Why can't you even do such simple things? You're really over as a woman. You're just too incompetent. You don't have to say it like that, I mutter with a bit of a troubled expression, and Jack glares at me. Then suddenly he threw the salad-filled dish onto the floor. At this unexpected act, a scream-like voice slipped out. "What are you doing?" Huh? It's because you, as a wife, can't even do the bare minimum, right? That's why I made it clear to you. You don't have to disrespect the food like that. Shut up. If you have time to make excuses, use your deficient brain to think more about how to become suitable as my wife. You fool. Fool? I'd been called that for the first time in my life. Sure, I've been scolded by my parents, and I've argued with my brother and friends, but I've never been subjected to such cruel words. More so, being told such things by the husband I love. It was only a few days since our marriage. I never imagined that he would throw the food on the floor just because he didn't like the dinner menu. That being said, I'm a housewife, and I'll continue to be dependent on him for our livelihood. I can't go against my husband. As a newlywed, the last thing I wanted to do was upset my husband. Since that day, I've been treading on eggshells around him. I'm extremely cautious not to step on his landmines. Every piece of laundry must be ironed meticulously. The loaded potato soup should be simple, and the seasoning of the side dishes should be well seasoned. Cleaning, even a single strand of hair on the floor, is not allowed. Living under such pressure, my nerves gradually wore thin. But without regard to me, his patriarchal dominance continued to escalate. Hey, this shirt has a crease left in the sleeve. Don't you have eyes? I'm sorry. I'll iron it right away. I'm leaving for work now, you know. You're always so slow. I'll do it right away. You won't have time for that. Damn, you're so annoying first thing in the morning. How much more do you need to upset me to be satisfied, you incompetent woman? I'm sorry, really sorry. Whenever I made a mistake, I immediately bowed my head in apology. This was also something ordered by my husband. Depending on the severity of the mistake, the level of my apology changes. This time, I was forgiven just by bowing. But when it's really bad, I have to kneel down in apology. When my mistakes continue, he sometimes even pointedly presents me with a filled-out divorce document. It's scary how you get used to things, and if you keep living like this for a year, you start to feel like you're absolutely worthless. But I can't divorce him, not in my current jobless state. I can't tell my parents, who were so happy for our marriage, that I got divorced. Especially not in such a short time span. The thought of continuing to be scolded by my husband forever filled me with despair for my future. As always, I was preparing dinner this day and waiting for him to come home. My daily routine is to finish cooking before 7 p.m. and have everything ready for him to eat at any time. As soon as the front door opens, I start laying out the food. If I don't finish by the time he sits down, I'll be forced to apologize again. My husband usually takes his seat in silence, but for some reason, this day was different. As he loosened his tie, he started a conversation with me. Mary, we're moving to my parents' house this weekend. Huh? Your parents' house? You mean your mom's place? Yeah, that's right. Have all our stuff packed by then. Why all of a sudden? Jack, you've always said that you didn't want to go back to your parents' house. In response to my probing question, his cold gaze pierced me. I instinctively shut my mouth, and after a pause, he opened his. My mother fell. and it's hard for her to live on her own now." "What? Then we should go there right away." "She's been hospitalized for a week. We're moving when she gets discharged this weekend." "And I see that's what happened. But why all of a sudden? You were so against going back to your parents' house." "You can guess why, can't you? Because I can inherit wealth." "Wealth?" As if he was delighted by his mother's situation, he continued the conversation. "Listen, my father was just an ordinary guy, but my mother's family is rich, so she has a decent amount of money." "What does that have to do with what happened this time?" "If I act dedicated during this time, I might be able to get a hefty inheritance, right? If we, as a couple, rush over, I'm sure she'll give us the whole inheritance." "For such a reason? Isn't that a bit disrespectful?" "Shut up. You're being supported by me, so just listen quietly." I'm sorry." Being yelled at loudly, I instinctively apologized as usual. In front of my downcast self, he proclaimed with a triumphant look, "Listen, you're the one who's going to take care of my mom. From now on, you're going to work as my maid at my parents' house for the rest of your life." "Maid? You mean like that?" "Don't talk back. Who do you think is providing for your current lifestyle?" "It's thanks to Jack." "Right. Depending on how seriously you take care of my mother, the amount of inheritance we can get will change. So don't slack off in the care, understand?" Urged to reply by him, I responded softly, "Yes." Seeing my obedience, he showed a satisfied smile before starting his dinner. Forcing me to care for his mother just for her inheritance? He doesn't think of me as his wife at all. To him, I'm just a housemaid. Although I knew this, being told so directly was quite a shock to me. Even so, I didn't have the courage to talk back. I was, in a sense, brainwashed, having erased my own possibilities. The next day, as per my husband's command, I began packing our belongings. We moved to my mother-in-law's place a week later to coincide with her discharge from the hospital. On the day of her discharge, Jack didn't come to the hospital, using work as an excuse. So I was the one accompanying my mother-in-law. On the way back from the hospital, my mother-in-law opened her mouth in apology. "Mary, I'm really sorry. Because of me, you're going through all this." "No, don't worry about it. I'm a housewife, and if I can support you while staying at home, then there's nothing better than that." "Thank you, but aren't you bothered by how sudden this was?" "Well, packing was a bit rushed, I guess." "I bet it was. Even I was surprised. Jack moving in with us? I wonder why he decided to do this all of a sudden. Mary, did you hear anything?" No, I didn't." It's understandable that my mother-in-law would find it strange. Jack has always disliked her, often saying things like, "She's a pain," and "I don't want to see her." Despite this, he moved in with her as soon as she was hospitalized, aiming for her inheritance. To be honest, I was taken aback by Jack's transformation. However, I couldn't tell my mother-in-law the truth. Trying not to give anything away, I pretended to be calm. From this day on, my life as a caregiver began. Adapting to the unfamiliar role of a caregiver, along with the housework in the large single-family home. Even returning to his parents' home didn't change Jack's domineering nature, and I was verbally abused almost daily when my mother-in-law wasn't around. I wasn't allowed to skimp on housework or caregiving, and my days were filled with constant activity from morning till night. This went on for about a month, Until one day, as I was wiping my mother-in-law's body, she voiced her concern. "Mary, have you lost weight again?" No, don't worry about it, Mother." "Are you sure? I thought the same when you moved in. You looked a lot more worn out than when you first got married." She was right. Over the past year and a half of married life, I've lost 15 pounds. It's not that I've been skipping meals, but my appetite has certainly decreased. More than that, I don't have time to eat leisurely. My mother-in-law noticed the changes in me that even Jack hadn't. Just that fact alone made me feel a little less lonely. Not wanting to worry my mother-in-law, I forced a smile. "Don't worry about me, Mother. Just being able to have these nice chats with you every day makes me happy." "Mary, let's stop this gloomy talk. Should I wipe your other hand, Mother?" Yes, please." Then my phone suddenly rang. "Oh, it looks like it's Jack." At my mother-in-law's words, my body tensed. Jack had ordered me to answer his calls immediately. However, as I was holding a wet towel, I couldn't answer right away. But I knew if I didn't respond promptly, Jack would be furious again. Using my elbow, I managed to hit the answer button and switch the call to speaker. "Hello?" I replied. The moment I answered, a loud, angry voice came from the other end of the line. "Hey, don't mess around!" it shouted. "Why didn't you answer immediately?" I'm sorry, I was a bit occupied." "What? A maid should answer at the first ring." "But I was in the middle of something and couldn't." "Didn't I always tell you not to talk back? You're so annoying. Why are you so incompetent?" I'm sorry." "You're taking proper care of the old lady, right? The amount of inheritance depends on how well you do your job. Do you get that?" Being berated in front of my mother-in-law brought a rush of shame. He repeatedly insulted me, calling me incompetent and annoying, and then abruptly hung up the phone. After Jack's call ended, a heavy silence filled the room. It was broken by none other than my mother-in-law. "Mary, that was Jack, right? Does he always talk to you like that?" Yes, but it's my fault. I am incompetent." "What are you saying? You're such a kind and good girl." "Mom." "I can't overlook this, Mary. It's time to get back at him." "Huh?" My mother-in-law then suggested a plan. Following her instructions, I threw all of Jack's belongings into the yard and locked the front door. Together we waited for Jack to come home. A few hours later, we could hear rattling noises from the entrance. It must have been Jack, but of course the locked door wouldn't open. Despite the intercom ringing, I ignored it just as my mother-in-law had instructed. Finally, my phone started ringing. It was Jack. I switched the call to speaker and answered. "Hello?" He started off shouting immediately. "Hey, don't mess around! Open the front door right now!" "I can't do that." "What? What are you saying?" "This is at the order of your mother." "What?" Unable to comprehend, he repeatedly shouted, "Don't mess around!" and "Open it now!" To him, my mother-in-law let out a cold voice. "The one messing around is you, you fool." Mom? I always knew you were cold, but I never thought you'd treat your wife like this. "No, that's not." "I knew something was off when you suddenly moved in. To use your wife and rely on inheritance. How can you live such a shameful life?" "No, that's not true." "What's not true?" "I have no intention of leaving you any inheritance. If you understand, get lost. This is my house. You will never be allowed back in." Flustered by my mother-in-law's words, Jack began pounding on the door. Through the phone, I could hear him begging, "Please, do something!" I have an ally, my mother-in-law. I won't be brainwashed any longer. With resolution, I said firmly to Jack on the phone, "I want a divorce. I can't go on with you anymore." "What? What are you saying?" "Shut up. I'm done being married to a man like you. I don't waste my life anymore. I won't give up on my own life. I've decided to carve out my own happiness." Don't joke around. You can't live without me." "There's nothing I can't do. No matter how tough it gets, it's better than being with you. I will overcome anything. I will no longer need you in my life. I refuse to have a trash like you." I abruptly hung up the phone and blocked his contact. His yelling could be heard from outside, but it eventually changed to cries of despair. My mother-in-law reported this to the police. For his nuisance behavior, he was taken away by officers. I used the divorce papers he had given me before to formally divorce him. On top of that, I sued him for compensation through a lawyer for mental and physical distress. With the witness of my mother-in-law, the proceedings went smoothly. After paying the lump sum compensation to me, Jack's savings were exhausted. In addition, he lost his position at his company after they found out about his police records, and he was reduced to an ordinary employee. Naturally, my mother-in-law refused to pass down her inheritance to Jack. After a discussion with the lawyer, in accordance with my mother-in-law's wish to leave everything to me, it was decided that she would transfer me about $1 million per year. I continue to care for my mother-in-law at her house. It's about the only thing I can do for her now. Mary, I'm so sorry for always troubling you. Even after divorcing Jack, you're still taking care of me. Why are you saying that, Mom? I should be the one thanking you. Really, I'm so fortunate to have a daughter like you. Same here. Let's keep supporting each other, okay? My life with my mother-in-law is filled with more smiles than I could have imagined. I'll do my best to do what I can for her until the end of her life.
I had never been sick a day in my life, and yet here I am. Rushed to the hospital, I find myself hooked up to an IV, lying in a bed. My husband and mom-in-law look down at me with disdain. We're supposed to be family, living under the same roof. "Useless wife," she muttered. I can't believe my eyes when they place divorce papers in front of me. My name is Sophia, and I'm 52 years old. I lost both parents in an accident as a child and was raised by my grandmother. She supported me through vocational school, and I fulfilled my lifelong dream of becoming a child care worker. Life was fulfilling until my grandmother, worried about my lack of love life in my 30s, introduced me to my now husband, Mason. I was inexperienced with relationships, but I fell for his kind face and slightly pushy demeanor. Quickly tied the knot when my grandmother's health suddenly deteriorated, hoping to give her peace of mind. After she passed away, she left me a small inheritance. "Because it makes me look bad," Mason said, and I became a housewife at his request. We used my inheritance as a down payment on a house in an upscale suburban neighborhood. Mason's high salary and our beautiful new home, everything seemed perfect. But then, reality hit us hard. We couldn't have children. By the time we considered fertility treatments, it was too late for me, and we decided to live a modest but happy life together. But there was one person who wasn't happy about this. It was my mom-in-law. Our relationship was never great, but after we decided not to have children, she started harassing me every time we visited.
You're just an immature woman who can't have kids. At least work hard when you're here.
Excuse me? As I am standing there, baffled, my mom-in-law smirks and says,
Well, isn't it nice that the daughter-in-law takes care of all the housework? Come on, let's relax in the living room.
My relatives follow her lead and exit the kitchen. I appreciate that my relatives would say,
Thank you, take care. Let us know if you need anything.
But not a single person offered to help me. I guess it makes sense. No one dares to challenge my temperamental mom-in-law, and nobody actually enjoys working in the kitchen. Perhaps because it's the countryside, there's always been a level of gender inequality at my spouse's parents' house. Centered around my father-in-law, the man would be drinking and making a ruckus while the women were busy with preparations. But I never thought all this work would fall on me just because we can't have kids. I can't handle alcohol, and it might be easier to work alone in the kitchen than deal with drunkards. Sighing deeply in the empty kitchen, I recall a recent moment when I stepped into the living room to serve the food. My relatives praised my work, but what my mom-in-law said was shocking. After I left the room, she openly called me
Wife who can only do housework, and that she's so clueless. I have to direct her all the time.
Mason, whether he knew about this or not, was happily drinking away. I wish he'd back me up a bit. When I sneakily talked to my husband about her attitude, he dismissed it, saying,
It's normal for a wife to do household chores at her in-laws, and it's normal for a husband not to speak highly of his wife. You're overthinking it.
Still, if I don't visit my spouse's parents' house, not only will my mom-in-law be upset, but Mason would be too. Even when I finally get a break, often all that's left for me to eat are leftovers. I know going to my spouse's parents' house isn't everyone's cup of tea, but I actually look forward to it. The reason? My niece Emma, who's my sister-in-law's daughter. We don't have any relatives close to her age, so when the uncles start getting loud and rowdy, she escapes to the kitchen where I am.
Auntie, can you help me with my homework?
Sure, come here. You see, I used to work part-time as a tutor. So while snacking on some treats, Emma and I would sit at the small kitchen table. I'd help her with her homework, or we'd play some card games. My mom-in-law adores Emma, her only grandchild, while everyone else also finds her charming. The pressure of their high expectations bothers her.
I'm just a kid, and they're already talking about me going to Harvard or becoming a politician. It's too much.
Yeah, your life is your own, I say, nodding, and she smiles relieved.
My dream is to help people, but let's keep that between us. Grandma can't be too much,
she says, winking. She's just so adorable. I can't help but wonder what her child would have been like. My mom-in-law doesn't like how close Emma and I are, but holds her tongue, likely fearing she'd alienate her grandchild. I love Emma, and she's fond of me too. Getting through the challenges of visiting back home became easier with her by my side. As time passed, a grown-up Emma started helping me out with all the housework at my spouse's parents' home. Alongside her, my sister-in-law, who occasionally visited, started lending a hand as well. Life at my spouse's parents' home gradually became more comfortable. Then one cold day happened. As I hurriedly prepared for the morning, the phone rang loudly.
What could this be about so early in the morning?
Mason grumbled, picking up the phone. An emergency at work, perhaps?
What did you say?
Mason's loud voice made me stop what I was doing.
What happened? My dad.
What? Turns out my father-in-law had suddenly passed away. He apparently had a heart attack when he went to the chilly kitchen for some water late at night. By the time my mom-in-law found him in the morning, he was already gone. He had been so lively just a month ago. Mason and I immediately went to my spouse's parents' home. Surrounded by a mournful atmosphere, the wake took place. That evening, while I was busy welcoming condolence visitors, I noticed Mason talking quietly with his mom in a corner. I was curious, but too busy to ask. I figured I could ask later and moved on. After the funeral, while relaxing at home, Mason spoke to me with a pleading tone.
Hey, can we talk?
Mason approached, his demeanor unusually pleading.
Sure, what's up?
I was instantly on guard, sensing his unusual demeanor.
I've decided that we're going to live with Mom.
What? I barely swallowed the scream that had risen to my throat.
You can just drop that on me out of nowhere. Look, it's our duty to take care of our aging parents, plus it's what Mom wants.
I couldn't believe it, living with that mom-in-law.
When did you decide this? I wasn't consulted at all. Why do I need your permission? I bought this house. It's my mom we're talking about, and you're living on my earnings.
I was at a loss for words. I couldn't believe he'd forced such outdated beliefs on me.
I've been working hard at home too. Besides, I became a housewife because you wanted it. Don't complain to me when you haven't earned a single dollar.
His shout made me flinch. Mason let out a long sigh and glared at me.
Who pays your mobile phone bill? Who bought your new morning attire? Even your makeup? I cover the cost. Living with Mom is decided. If you don't want to lose this lifestyle, then don't complain.
Yes, Mason does financially support our lifestyle. But I thought we had a deal. He works outside, I take care of home. I have no parents to fall back on, no savings. And finding a job is not as easy as it sounds. For me, the idea of being apart from Mason was terrifying.
Fine.
I had no choice but to accept living with her. Life became hell once my mom-in-law moved in. With no relatives around to hold her back, she harassed me more than ever before. She complained about everything I did, from cooking and cleaning to laundry, morning till night. I'm stuck at home, lazing around on the sofa in front of the TV every day. Sometimes my mom-in-law goes out and comes back with random purchases, blowing through the money she got from selling her house and dipping into our savings.
I'm back. Went down to the station and got you your favorite cake,
she says, ignoring me and starting a conversation with Mason.
Oh, looks tasty. Wait, why are there only 2 slices?
Obviously, one for you and one for me. Sophia, make us some coffee, will you?
Am I just a convenient servant here? If only Mason would take my side, things might be easier. Living with Mason has been like living with a child. Rather than standing by me, his wife, he always puts his mother's words first. Even when I tell him how I'm being jerked around by his mom, he says,
Don't you feel sorry for Mom. She's all alone in a new place. Try to be nice to her.
As if I am the one at fault. Between a selfish, mean mom-in-law and a spineless Mason, I'm starting to feel pretty lonely. Fast forward 3 months. After sending Mason off to work as usual, a sudden sharp pain strikes my stomach. The pain is so intense that I collapse onto the floor. I'm sweating bullets. This isn't good.
Excuse me, Mom-in-law.
I mustered the strength to get back to the living room and see her, watching her morning soap opera and sipping coffee.
Could you pass me the cell phone? I need to call Mason.
What? Just get it yourself. Besides, Mason just left. He can't answer calls on the bus.
Mom-in-law refuses to listen to my emergency.
I'm in extreme pain. I need to call a ride to the hospital.
You want to bother my son at work for a little stomach ache? Not on my watch.
I reach for the phone and dial 911. Soon enough, an ambulance pulls up with sirens blaring.
What? Why is there an ambulance? Did you call it?
She looks shocked, as if she never expected this.
If you won't let me call Mason, what choice do I have?
This is completely unnecessary.
Her face flushes red with anger. The rescue squad quickly loads me onto a stretcher and takes me away.
You're in safe hands. We're headed to the nearest hospital.
The paramedic assures me. When was the last time someone spoke to me so kindly? Just as I start to feel relieved, my consciousness starts to fade. When I come to, I'm in a hospital bed. It's already dark outside, and there's my mom-in-law, dressed to the nines, and Mason still in his suit, sitting next to me with stern faces. According to the doctor, it looks like I have a stomach ulcer. The moment the doctor leaves after telling me I'll be hospitalized for a week, Mason lets out a deep sigh.
So you collapsed right after I left for work, huh?
Is he worried? A glimmer of hope arises in my heart, but I was sorely mistaken.
Why didn't you call me instead of summoning an ambulance? Such a drama queen.
My tiny glimmer of hope vanishes in an instant. I felt as if that small light of hope was snuffed out, plunging me into darkness.
You're always like this. Getting your priorities all wrong. Is that why you're so inefficient at housework and stressed out? What a hustle you are.
Oh, please. The real stress is 70% you, mom-in-law, and 30% you, Mason. I'm too stunned to speak. As I fall silent, mom-in-law smirks and says,
A homemaker's job is to keep the house in order. And you're planning to slack off in the hospital for a week? You're a disgrace as a wife. Let's just get divorced.
In mom-in-law's wrinkled hand, there's a piece of paper. Yes, it's a divorce paper.
Exactly, Mom's right.
Mason chimes in, smirking as he starts filling out the form.
Wait.
I panic.
What happens to me if I'm abandoned now?
I try to snatch the form from Mason, but my body won't cooperate. As Mason finishes filling out the form, he chuckles, seemingly amused at my situation.
See? She can't even live without me.
Mom-in-law, holding on to the divorce papers, looks at me and said,
How pathetic.
Mason laughs along. Stunned, I watch as Mason places my favorite bag and an envelope in front of me.
Here's what you'll need for your stay. We're busy, so get whatever else you need yourself. This should cover it.
Inside the envelope is money, presumably for the hospital bills.
Oh, thanks. Sorry you had to dip into our savings.
Savings? No way. We didn't use that.
What?
My hope dies again.
We cashed out your insurance. We've had it for years, so the termination refund was substantial. Use what's in the envelope freely. I'll use half for our living expenses.
I can't believe he'd cancel my insurance without asking, especially when we had savings. And he's using half for living expenses? Planning a vacation while I'm hospitalized? I became certain of it. Mason and mom-in-law couldn't care less about my well-being. I'm both sad and angry. Glancing down, I see the divorce papers.
The divorce thing was a joke. Relax.
Mason smirks, noticing my look. He signed it, but it's a joke? I can't help glaring at them, but both are still laughing. Something in me snaps. Why am I even in a family with these people?
That envelope doesn't include transportation money. Let me know when you're discharged.
Mason says as they leave. As they walk away, I crumple the divorce papers in my hand. Numbly, I open the bag. Inside, besides my wallet and a pen, there are just a few added towels. I never thought they knew where my pajamas and underwear were, so it's as I expected. I have to buy almost everything new. Just as I sigh, the curtain around my hospital bed opens slightly. A nurse? I slowly looked up and I couldn't help but gasp. No way! There, standing right in front of me, was Emma, my beloved niece, now a full-fledged nurse. We were both so happy at this unexpected reunion. When I told her why I was in the hospital, she got angry as if it was happening to her. I never expected to find an ally here. I was so happy. I almost cried, and then I saw an opportunity. I won't rest until I make those two who look down on me regret it. So Emma and I started to devise a plan. After about a week, free from the stress of Mason and my mom-in-law, I was recovering well and set to be discharged tomorrow. I was on the phone in the empty room when it happened.
We heard you're getting discharged, so we thought we'd come.
In walk Mason and my mom-in-law. Mason holding a bag from his favorite cake shop.
We have to visit the wife at least once or people will talk.
I pulled the phone from my ear, setting the screen down on the table, and sat on the bed, nodding. Thank you for coming. They pulled up chairs near the bed and sat down.
You've had plenty of rest. You'll be working again from tomorrow.
What a way to say hello. Sure enough, there were 2 cakes in the bag on the table. They brought cakes for a hospital visit, but none for me.
Why don't you go buy some coffee from the shop? Our son used his precious day off to visit you.
I don't think I have any money left. I spent it all on pajamas and underwear. I shook my head, and my mom-in-law audibly clicked her tongue.
Can't even buy a single coffee when you're the one causing inconvenience by being in the hospital. You lazy woman.
Who's lazy one here? Just then, the curtain around the bed whisked open, and a smiling nurse appeared. Is it fun for you to harass your daughter-in-law in a hospital, Grandma? What? My mom-in-law's face turned pale with shock, and for good reason. The nurse was Emma, her most cherished granddaughter.
You don't work at this hospital, Emma. Why are you here?
I just transferred here. I was surprised too. I got called in to help, and when I came, I found my aunt here with a gastric ulcer. She doesn't smoke or drink, so I couldn't believe it until I heard what you just said. Emma's icy, stern words left my mom-in-law trembling.
No, you misunderstand, Emma.
No use making excuses. My words enraged my mom-in-law even more.
Shut up, you!
Sure, I can shut up, but you do know everything is being heard, right?
What?
I lifted my phone and showed her the screen. It displayed a call in progress with my sister-in-law.
What have you done?
My mom-in-law's accusation was cut off by my sister-in-law's voice over the speaker.
What's wrong with you, Mason? Your wife is hospitalized and this is how you act? Enough is enough!
Hearing my sister-in-law shouting, even Mason shrank back a bit. Sister-in-law and my niece are such justice-oriented folks that you'd think they were from a different family than mom-in-law and Mason. The idea to secretly listen in on the conversation between Mason and mom-in-law in the hospital room was all sister-in-law's plan. After watching Mason and mom-in-law shrink in size, I turned to sister-in-law again. Sister-in-law, thank you so much. I hang up the phone and look at Mason, who's all shriveled up. I haven't just been sleeping and resting this week, you know. You filed for divorce a week ago, right? I'll agree to it. Let's get divorced.
What?
Mason stares at me, dumbfounded. Of course he is. He never thought a housewife with no job or place to live would willingly let go of her current life. His baffled expression is so priceless, I can't help but laugh. Annoyed, Mason yells,
You have no job, no home. What are you planning to do?
I calmly answer, I'll work at the hospital. Emma's boss lives in the neighborhood. I explain the situation and everything is set. Never thought I'd be indebted to a neighbor like this. Mason counters.
You're not a doctor or a nurse. How can you work in a hospital?
Emma interjects with a smile. Uncle, you really don't know? This hospital employs various professionals, not just doctors and nurses. Emma winks at me as I watch Mason, flabbergasted. It's the same kind of eye contact we had while tutoring or playing card games at the spouse's parents' house. I'll be working in the hospital's child care center. They even have dormitories, so housing won't be an issue, I declare confidently. Mom-in-law, defending Mason, who's lost for words, angrily thrusts her wrinkled hand at me.
Stop joking. If you're not my daughter-in-law, pay the full hospital bill.
No, I'll take it. Oh, by the way, I'll be invoicing you for the divorce settlement later.
What?
Do you know about asset division? I can claim half of the assets that Mason and I saved together.
What are you saying?
Mom-in-law trembles. Mason shakes his head in confusion, but I just smile. Also, since I was hospitalized due to stress from you and mom-in-law, I'll be claiming damages in the divorce court. I have witnesses here too. Emma's icy stare focuses on mom-in-law. Unable to withstand the unexpected situation, mom-in-law and Mason flee the room. 2 cakes are left on the table in front of us. Emma, you like sweets, right? It's a waste to throw them away. Let's eat. She nods with the same youthful smile as always. The next day, I'm discharged and submit the divorce papers. Later, under the condition that I won't claim damages in court, Mason agrees to pay a generous amount for asset division. That's when I found out, apparently, the rumor had spread from Emma's boss. Mason and my mom-in-law were being talked about in the neighborhood as the villains who sent me to the hospital. Once I started getting used to my new life, I get a chance to hear about them from Emma, who lives in the same building as me. They'd been living together for a while, but their days were full of constant arguments. My elderly mom-in-law couldn't handle the chores that her son demanded. She tried to get help from her daughter's home, but her daughter-in-law or sister-in-law had always disliked her. She was promptly turned down. Of course, the rest of the family found out they are now estranged. Their biannual family gatherings have ceased to exist. As for me, I'm receiving guidance from a younger colleague, and despite the challenges of returning to work, my days are fulfilling. I can't get enough of my children reaching out their tiny hands for some love and affection. I occasionally go to lunch with my niece Emma, both as workplace colleagues and as friends. I may not have my own family, but I have Emma, who's like a daughter to me, and the chance to interact with children who are adorable as grandchildren. This is more than enough for happiness. During nap time in the nursery, I start to hear the soft snoring of a little girl whose back I've been rubbing.
You're going to take care of your father-in-law for the rest of your life. I'm going to live with my new daughter-in-law, haha. One day, my mother-in-law suddenly dropped this on me. Basically, she was saying that my husband was having an affair, and she was backing it up. Furthermore, they planned to live at the mistress's house. At my in-laws' house, there was a wheelchair-bound father-in-law who needed care. Despite this, my husband and his mother went to the mistress's house. What they did was, of course, unforgivable. However, I couldn't just leave my father-in-law behind and leave. As I wavered, my father-in-law finally stood up. My name is Linda, 30 years old. I married my husband Bob, and it's almost our 3rd year. At first, we got along so well, but now we don't talk as much. Is this what they call getting used to? The more you know each other, the more your love stabilizes, and you end up seeking a more stable life. There was no problem with our marital life, but it could be described as unstimulating. Plus, about a year ago, my husband's job got busy, and he started to work overtime. Business trips, which were almost non-existent before, have become a few times a month. However, he always covers the living expenses, and I have a job too. I can't always worry about him. Sometimes when he comes home early, we have dinner together and make up for the lost time. From the outside, it may look like our marriage is cooling down, but that's not the case. This is the shape of our marriage. This unchanging married life was our norm. Then, one day, when I finished work and came home, my husband was already there. Usually, he doesn't come home until after 10 p.m., but it was still 7 p.m. "Welcome back." To his greeting, I asked back, "Bob, you came home early today. Didn't you have to work overtime?" "That's not the point. My father had an accident and is in the hospital." "Wait, your father?" According to my husband, his father had an accident on his way to work at his own company when a car ignoring the red light crashed into him. Fortunately, he didn't have any fatal injuries, but he was left with paralysis in both legs and one arm, forcing him into a wheelchair-bound life. "My father-in-law had an accident? You've got to be kidding. My father-in-law, who loved hiking and fishing, is now wheelchair-bound? That's too pitiful." My father-in-law was an outdoor enthusiast, and he often took my husband and me to various places. He treated me like his own daughter and always said, "If you ever have any problems, feel free to rely on me." Such a father-in-law had an accident? It was hard to believe. My father-in-law was running his own company, but my husband works for a different company. So we weren't immediately notified about his accident. We only found out when my mother-in-law contacted us. In this day and age, we couldn't visit him as often as we wanted, which was frustrating. My husband Bob started the conversation with a serious look in his eyes. "Well, Linda, Mom asked me to do something about Dad." "What did your mom ask for?" "Well, she was wondering if we could help take care of Dad." "Take care of your father?" "Yeah, Mom's been getting on in years, right? So she's finding it difficult to do it all by herself. She wants us to help out." "So that means we'd have to move to your parents' house?" "That's right. There's plenty of room at their house, and we'll have enough space. What do you think?" I fell silent. I admire my father-in-law and care about him a lot, but I can't just say, "Oh, sure, no problem," and readily agree to a thing that I've never done before. It's not that I don't care about your father, but I have a job too. Suddenly, asked to provide care, what should I do? I racked my brain trying to come up with the best solution. But no matter how much I thought about it, no good ideas came to mind. Perhaps sensing my state, Bob took my hand and stared at me straight. "Linda, I need you. I know it's going to be tough since it's your first time. But if we leave it all to Mom, I'm worried she might break down too." "Well, I think it will be tough. But I have a job too." "Linda, you can quit your job. I'll earn our living expenses, so can you dedicate yourself to taking care of Mom and Dad?" Quit my job?" "Yes, I'll earn the money and support you. That's why I need you. Our family needs you. Bob pleading on his knees repeatedly. Eventually, I decided to quit my job and dedicate myself to taking care of my father-in-law, just as Bob had said. A few days after we started living together, Bob suddenly said, "I'll take over my father's company and become the president." Even my father-in-law was surprised by this, but perhaps he was secretly happy that his son would take over his company. Tears welling up in his eyes, my father-in-law said to Bob, "Bob, I can't believe you said that. After all this time of you saying, I won't work at your company. Well, that was, how do I say it, like playing hard to get? With you in this condition, Dad, I can't just leave the company alone, right?" "Thank you. I was wondering what to do with the company. I thought I'd leave it to someone who I can trust. But if you're willing to take it over, I'd like to pass it on." "I knew you'd agree, Dad. I'll do my best as your son." "Yes, I'm counting on you. For the sake of the employees who followed me, please create a good working environment." "Of course." So Bob took over his father's company, and my father-in-law moved from the president to the chairman. Usually the chairman has various responsibilities. However, my father-in-law decided to leave the company's operations entirely to Bob, retaining only his title. 2 months had passed since Bob took over after my father-in-law. Every day he returns home past midnight. At first I thought he was just busy with unfamiliar work and kept working overtime. But every night of overtime work is surely too much. What further aroused my suspicion was my husband's peculiar scent. That day, I was unable to fall asleep, and as the late night hours rolled by, I was still wide awake. When I got up to drink a glass of water from the kitchen, I heard the front door open. I quickly moved towards the entrance, and the moment I greeted him with "Welcome home," I smelled the scent of soap coming from my husband. Upon seeing me, my husband opened his mouth with a surprised look. Why are you up at this hour?" I couldn't sleep." "Bob, you've been coming home late as usual." "Well, I can't help it, can I? I've taken over my dad's business, and there's a lot I don't know." "I see. You must be having a hard time." "I'm tired. I'm going to bed." As he tried to leave, I smelled the scent of soap again. On the spur of the moment, I grabbed his arm and interrogated him with a stern tone. "Bob, who do you usually work overtime with?" "What? Why the sudden question?" "No, it's just, I noticed a nice scent coming from you." "Why the hell should I know that? I'm working my ass off. Don't ask me about such petty things." His facial expression was more irritated than ever. His attitude only served to amplify my suspicions. As I struggled with how to press him further, Bob let out a sigh. "Seriously, can you stop with that? I come home tired, and you interrogate me as soon as I get back. That's not a pleasant welcome." "I didn't mean to. I was just curious." "So you're doubting me. We're living comfortably because I work like this every day. Do you get that?" "I understand that." "Damn it. If you have some time to talk about this crap, why don't you do some cleaning? I don't have time for this." With that, he stormed off upstairs, leaving me alone in the living room. When I peeked into the bedroom, he was ignoring me and messing around on his smartphone. Despite my attempts to apologize, he ignored me completely. The next day, my mother-in-law confronted me with a demonic expression. "Linda, I heard you suspected Bob of cheating yesterday." I didn't suspect him. I just asked who he was working overtime with. "That's suspicious enough. You're able to live because Bob is working hard. Do you realize that?" "I do, and I'm grateful. All I did was voice a concern I had." "That's what I'm telling you is rude. What are you trying to achieve by making Bob uncomfortable? You're the worst as a wife." After screaming at me, she dumped all the housework on me and stormed out. My mother-in-law has never really liked me. In front of my husband and father-in-law, she pretends to share the housework, but in reality, I'm the one doing all the chores in this house. And, of course, I'm also the one taking care of my father-in-law. My mother-in-law often finds excuses to go out, returning only in the evening. My father-in-law, who basically stays in his room, is not aware of how often she leaves during the day. Sometimes people from the company come to visit him, but other than that, he hardly ever leaves his room. Moreover, I've been warned by my mother-in-law not to tell my father-in-law and Bob anything unnecessary. I had no choice but to silently do the housework and caregiving. What made it bearable was the presence of my father-in-law. Every time I did something, he would thank me with a sorry look on his face.
Linda, I'm sorry. You must hate taking care of an old man like me, right?
That's not the case at all. I think of you, my father-in-law, as my own father. It's an honor to be a help to you.
Having you say such things, it makes me feel lucky. I'm really glad that a person like you married Bob.
Oh my, likewise. I'm glad to have a kind person like you as my father-in-law. There are many days when the actions and words of my husband and mother-in-law are hurtful. In the midst of this, the existence of my father-in-law, who needs me, has barely kept me going. It's my role to wipe down my father-in-law before he goes to sleep and turn off the lights. When I finish everything and return to the living room today, my husband, who usually shouldn't be here at this time, showed up with my mother-in-law. My husband had a nasty grin on his face. Perhaps he had been talking to my mother-in-law. I have a bad feeling. The next moment I thought so, unbelievable words were released from my mother-in-law's mouth.
Oh, good timing! I have something to tell you.
Something to talk about?
I'll cut to the chase, okay? You should take care of your father here for the rest of your life.
Mother-in-law? What are you talking about?
I've decided to live with a new daughter-in-law. Of course, Bob will be with me too.
A new daughter-in-law? I unintentionally lost my words at the shock. I realized I was frozen on the spot. A new daughter-in-law? What on earth is she talking about? Why doesn't Bob say anything? As if to ridicule my silence, my husband shoved a divorce paper in front of me.
I have a girlfriend. My mom and I have decided to live at her place.
What?
I'm going to pack up now and leave with my mom. Whether or not you submit the divorce papers is up to you. But you know, either way, it's your job to take care of Dad.
No way! I felt hopeless and I collapsed to my knees on the spot. My husband and mother-in-law started packing their things, leaving me behind. Tears start to spill in the silent living room. Then my father-in-law in his wheelchair appeared.
Linda, it's quite noisy. What happened to Bob and his mother?
Father-in-law.
Hey, why are you crying? What exactly happened?
I conveyed the conversation I had earlier to my father-in-law. His expression became increasingly stiff, and by the time I finished telling him, his eyes had changed. He stood up briskly and announced with an unprecedented strength.
Linda, it's time for a counterattack.
Huh? Your legs!
Sorry for keeping silent. The truth is, I've been able to walk for a while now. It's okay, leave everything to me. The preparation is already in place.
My father-in-law pulled a large brown envelope from the drawer and showed me its contents. Father-in-law, this is... What was inside were various pieces of evidence of my husband's infidelity. And, unbelievably, evidence of my mother-in-law's infidelity as well. According to him, since Bob became the president, my father-in-law had trustworthy employees monitor his actions at the company. As a result, it was found out that my husband leaves work precisely on time every day. Despite everything, I found him coming home after midnight every night. My father-in-law then commissioned a private detective to investigate my husband. He seemed to have noticed that his wife was out during the day, and he asked them to investigate her as well. As a result, both of their affairs came to light. The woman my husband was cheating with was also known to his mother, and it was found that they had met together. These pieces of evidence were obtained just recently. He seemed to be struggling with when to tell me the truth.
It's blunt, but I'm glad I could talk. Linda, what do you want to do?
I want to get back at those two.
I see. Leave the rest to me.
My father-in-law then made a call to someone on his smartphone. It seems to be someone from his company, and my husband was subsequently demoted from his CEO position. I submitted the divorce papers as my father-in-law had told me. Using the evidence of the affair, I asked for compensation from Bob and his lover through a lawyer. A week later, Bob came to visit his parents' house, presumably because a certified mail had arrived. In front of me and my father-in-law, he yelled back defensively,
"Hey, Dad, what's going on? Just because I cheated, there's no need to fire me from the CEO position. Shut up. You didn't help me with my care, and you hurt Linda. It's a million years too early for a scumbag like you to be in a leadership position." "What? I'm cutting ties with you. Never come back to this house again." But...
Bob fell to his knees in tears. He clung to me in disdain, pleading desperately.
Linda, please. I don't mind if you retract the divorce, so...
So?
Please convince Dad. I'll break up with my lover, so please drop the compensation claim.
Even now, this guy is only thinking about saving himself. I was utterly disillusioned with him. To release all my pent-up frustration, I spoke boldly. "What are you talking about now? Retract the divorce? I didn't ask for that. You know what? I feel great to be able to divorce a scumbag like you. There's no way I'll ever go back to being your wife."
"Do you mean you've already... the divorce papers?"
"Of course! Why should I willingly stay married to a terrible person like you? Being divorced and being fired as CEO, it's all your own fault. It's the seed you sowed."
"But those divorce papers, I only used them as a thread."
"I thought so. I hope you, your mother, and your lover all go to hell. You need to give up on the idea of getting help from someone else." With a dismissive gesture, I threw him out the front door. From outside, Bob's pleading cries could be heard.
"Help me! I was wrong. I won't cheat again, so please forgive me. Linda, Dad, please don't abandon me."
Neither my father-in-law nor I ever responded to those cries again. Later, my ex-husband and mother-in-law were sued for alimony and subsequently evicted from their mistress's home. Due to their swift breakup, they found themselves homeless, reportedly forced to live in a comic book cafe for a while. Bob paid me alimony, and his mother paid my father-in-law, depleting their savings and leading them to accumulate debt. Homeless and without food, they are now forced to live a life of poverty, working day jobs. On the other hand, I continue to take care of my father-in-law at his home, despite the divorce. My father-in-law kindly told me,
"You're welcome to stay as long as you'd like."
Relying on his kindness, I decided to live in my in-laws' home. Recently, as my father-in-law has started going to a daycare service during the daytime, I've started working during those hours. There will be various challenges in the future, but no matter what happens, I want to do as much as I can for my father-in-law.